I've never played the original Final Fantasy VII, but after experiencing part 1 of this remake in 2020, and now having finished Rebirth in 2024, I'm starting to understand the enduring love for this 7th entry. Picking up shortly after the events of Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth tells the story of the middle portions of that original game, emphasizing character building amongst the party members, expanding the scope of the world, and inching closer to a confrontation with Sephiroth. Of course, it's all been expanded dramatically here. My playthrough clocked in at 66 hours, but looking at data online, it seems like most people finish the original in about 40 hours, and that's the complete experience. So yes, the scope is much bigger here, easily dwarfing the original and the 2020 remake. Much of the additional fluff comes in the form of open world content, side quests, and controversial minigames, which will really heighten or sour the experience depending on your perspective. For me, much of this additional content was appreciated and enjoyed, but it's important for me to be upfront about it. There are a ton of minigames, many mandatory, many optional, and they will play a large role in shaping your individual thoughts with this game. I didn't find them to be a deal breaker for reasons I'll outline later, but suffice it to say, you will be thrown into them often. While I enjoyed many of them, the reason I was able to overlook the lesser ones is because of how strong the rest of the package is. A consistently beautiful world full of variety serves as the backdrop to your adventure, featuring some of the most believable terrain I've ever seen in a video game. The combat remains flashy, fast, and enjoyable, making consistent menu interruptions feel like a natural move within the rhythm of fighting. And a decent amount of character customization allows you to imprint some variation on character build staples like tanks and supports. But what truly elevates the game is the character building. Rebirth is all about conveying the backstories and dynamics between the party members. Light moods and good vibes persist just as much as heavier and darker moments, allowing the characters to shine in moments of joy, sadness, and anger without rushing through any of the emotion. The peaceful moments allow the player to learn more about the ragtag party members, opening up avenues to joy in the best of times and sympathy and grief in the worst of times. I remember really enjoying the characters in the 2020 remake, especially Barrett, but this takes it to a whole new level. Again, I haven't played the original, but its biggest twist is one of the most iconic moments in video game history, so of course I knew about it. I'm sure if you're watching this, you do too. You probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And I knew that moment would probably be found somewhere in this game, and it certainly is. I'll avoid direct spoilers for now, but the ending of Remake opened the doors for new interpretations, and the looming threat of that moment for anyone initiated hangs over the entire adventure, drawing even more emotion out of you when the time finally comes. The presentation of that moment will also play a large role in determining your overall thoughts on the direction this remake has taken. For me though, it worked. Not in full, but it worked. And so those are my overall thoughts on Rebirth. If you're looking for a simple yes or no on if you should buy this, the answer is yes, but definitely play the 2020 remake first, at the very least. As we move forward, I will be opening up the spoiler warning, but that's mostly going to apply to the story section towards the back half of the video, and I'll give another reminder then. For now, I really appreciate your patience for this video. It took me a lot longer to get it out than I originally expected, but let's get a move on with my full review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Amongst the flashy combat, heartfelt story beats, and the minigames, you'd be forgiven for overlooking just how good the geographical layout of Rebirth's world is. The planet, as it's so affectionately referred to, is one of the most well-realized video game worlds I've ever been in, topping even that of Horizon Forbidden West a few years back. The scope is unbelievable, consistently providing the player with incredible vistas that will make them feel as tiny as a mouse. To be fair, many games nowadays provide these moments of awe, but what makes Rebirth special is how its terrain lies on each and every footstep. From the smooth hills of the grasslands, to the jagged rocks of Junon and Nibelheim, to the dense jungle and cliffs of Gungaga, and to the sheer mountains of Cosmo Canyon, every detail feels accurate to the biome it's felt in. There's a sense of verticality throughout the adventure, most often noticed in giant mountains or cliffsides, but often going underappreciated in the short inclines of rocky steps or uneven terrain. Even the towns are built around the landscape. The city of Calm sits on a hilltop, and so you'll have to move down to reach the grasslands. Meanwhile, Cosmo Canyon is built right into the side of the mountain, and the winding streets contour to it wonderfully, sacrificing ease of navigation for geographical consistency. I'm a sucker for these tiny details, of which there are plenty here, and I hope you'll take a few moments to appreciate them when and if you check this game out. Of course, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is an open world game, and many of these biomes are intermingled with pretty believable transition points between them, save for Corel into Gungaga, where a desert quickly becomes a jungle. As you play, you may not realize how interconnected the world is, but by the later chapters of the game, things open up and you can move freely from region to region. Seriously, fast travel if you want, but you're permitted to hop in a boat and sail back and forth between the different regions devoid of any load screens from what I can tell. That's incredible. As a result, the game feels like a world without boundaries, and when the planet itself plays such a vital role in the overall narrative, it was important to make sure it felt boundless and seamless, and it certainly does here. As I alluded to earlier, this dedication to geographical presentation does not always equate to ease of navigation for the player. While it didn't bother me too much, there were certainly moments where I found myself confused on how to reach a map marker, particularly in Gungaga and Cosmo Canyon. That's because these levels feature specific traversal mechanics like bounce mushrooms and gliding ramps. They bottleneck the player into certain routes, which can be a nuisance to uncover. Outside of these rare moments though, I felt the world design was nothing short of incredible. Another noteworthy result of this excellent world building is how the cultures of each town you come to are shaped by their environmental surroundings. There's plenty of these towns as you move throughout the game, often being home to the story bits, while the open world sections provide the player with a deluge of side content to engage with. In fact, until the game opens up later on, this is how you experience most of it. Town, open world, town, open world, town, open world, repeat. But again, the way of life amongst these towns is often shaped by their region's environments. For example, the people of Calm live a relatively normal life. The nearby hillsides are tamed enough for easy traversal, meaning the people here didn't have to adapt all that much. Meanwhile, in Cosmo Canyon, the town is full of planetologists, the in-game version of an astronomer. The high peaks the town was founded on allows for intense stargazing, and it's reflected in how the people here live. And then, in northern Corel, there's a small, dilapidated mining town. For years, this society functioned on mining, as the nearby mountain ranges made farming and other industries an impossible venture. But when Mako became the default energy source, this town fell into despair. Hopefully these examples paint the picture of how interwoven the geography, cultures, and backstories of this world and its people are. It's safe to say there's a lot more to the planet than we experienced in Midgar. While riding around the open world, there's a ton to do, but I'll save that for the next section of the video. But while we're on the subject, I did want to mention the plethora of materials found throughout the world and the system they tie into. As you're riding around the open world sections or through smaller story design levels, there's always things to be picking up. There's so many other things to engage with, so it never gets boring or feels like the only thing to do, like in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Anyway, you can use this harvest of materials to create items using the transmutation device. This was a smart inclusion, as you can use your resources to craft armor and make potions and other healing materials while out in the open world. You don't have to return to a town just to stock up, you have the means to do so right on your torso. That made for a great inclusion and saved me a lot of time as I reflect on it. However, there were a few side quests that were tied into gathering these materials, and that was a real drag, especially when you had to find rare ones. I think that was a minor mistake, locking off side quest progression behind aimless grinding. A lot of what I've described so far applies to the open world sections of the game. While completing story content though, you'll often find yourself in interior environments like abandoned ruins of an old reactor, the very dense Shinra Manor, the streets of towns, or archaic temples. While these sections don't impress quite as much as the open world moments, they're still impressive in their own right. They're a lot more linear to facilitate the story, and they serve that function well. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the quest design. Okay, yeah, this is going to be the longest section of the video because there is so much content in Rebirth, it's actually insane. I'm going to break this into a few sections covering the main quest, the side quests, the world intel quest, the combat simulator, mini games, and of course, Queen's Blood, because it deserves its own section, let's be honest. So when it comes to the main story quest of Final Fantasy VII, you're going to be finding a lot of cutscenes, combat sections, and mini-games. No duh. There will be missions that are more story-focused, like walking around Cosmo Canyon, talking to folks to gather more information, trying to get your bearings in the Gold Saucer, or just chatting with your companions in Calm to raise their affinity towards you and change the dynamic between them and Cloud. Often, these sorts of missions will find ways to sneak in a few mini-games like chocobo racing to earn the freedom of your friends, or a virtual 3D brawler where you go toe-to-toe with the ultimate director of entertainment. Or maybe you'll have to get a high score while riding on the back of a dolphin, or partaking in a shooting gallery. Or hell, maybe you'll have to play Rocket League as Red 13, or maybe even march to the beat in a parade as you disguise yourself and infiltrate a Shinra platoon. Or maybe you'll have to compete in a Queen's Blood tournament, or, oh, I know, doing an on-rail shooter section in a minecart. Okay, we're getting a bit out of hand. The point is that there are so many mini-games, so many, that are brought right into the main story. From what I understand, this aligns well with the original from 1997, which was apparently full of mini-games too. They really leaned into preserving that here, and it will be either really charming or a major fatiguing factor for some players. To be honest, of all the ones I mentioned here already, I didn't find any of them to be intrusive, save for the 3D brawler, which I can never get my head around despite it being relatively simple. For the most part, I found many of these mini-games to be enjoyable and opened up great moments for character exploration and light-hearted adventure. This was particularly true in the chapter taking place in Costa del Sol, where the party goes on a mini vacation of sorts. Here, I felt the mini-games helped amplify the mood the story was going for, and that was great. There were a few misses though, like the aforementioned 3D brawler, but also this section where you have to break boxes as Cloud to get a high score so that you can get some grass to feed a chocobo. That was a drag, especially because the minigame itself didn't tie in well to the story beats at that current time. It just felt arbitrary, kind of like the dolphin ride, but at least that was playful fun. By the way, keep in mind that the minigames I just mentioned are only ones found in the main story, the mandatory ones. I'll talk more about the others in a bit, but with so many optional ones to engage with, perhaps loading so many into the main story was a bit overkill. Again, it didn't bother me too much, but since they're these one-off minigames that appear and then never come back again, it's going to be a real nuisance to many folks. Then of course, you have your more combat-oriented missions, like traversing the Mithril Mines and old reactors, laying waste to any fiends that stand in your way. These missions promote the excellent combat and are mostly a joy to play so long as the pacing and puzzles intermingled aren't too aggravating. There are a few times where things really drag though, particularly a section late in the game where you play as Cait Sith and have to throw boxes at switches using a somewhat janky set of mechanics. That part went on for so long, as did the final 2 chapters, but at least they were building towards an epic climax. For the most part though, these fighting-focused main missions are a lot of fun and do a great job of raising the stakes and pushing the plot forward while giving the player the chance to unload on a bunch of different enemy types. But regardless of if main missions are more combat or minigame focused, the cutscenes remain excellent. They allow the characters to shine and take the center stage most of the time, as much of the adventure itself is just about following around some black-robed men. Since major plot moments are sprinkled in at larger intervals, it allows the characters and their dynamics to really come through, endearing them to you quite easily. In fact, I sort of came to love these characters in the same way I do with those in Persona games. You get that level of interaction and camaraderie regardless of what content you're engaging with, but it certainly felt through the main story. They weren't afraid to lean into the absurdity at times, emphasizing humor in the process, especially in the side content, while allowing the main story cutscenes to really drive home the stakes and more emotionally resonant moments. So yes, that's what you can expect if you simply want to beeline the main story. Some combat, some minigames, and some adventure with some great characters. And then we get to the optional content, and holy crap, there's a lot of it. Let's start with the tried and true side quest. For full disclosure, I completed about 85 to 90% of all side missions in the game, leaving a few unfinished towards the end so that I could get to, the actual ending. Seriously, right as you're about to reach the final stretch, the game unlocks like 10 additional side quests to complete. Like, it's crazy. You're just like, okay, no dog, I already did so much, I just want to see how this thing ends. Anyway, after playing Final Fantasy XVI last year and being generally disappointed with the side quests, I was a bit apprehensive coming into this game. 16 failed to create interesting objectives or characters to make for worthwhile optional content, but luckily that isn't the case here. You won't notice it right away, but many side quests here fall into a category like following and protecting an animal, or taking photos, or going on a treasure hunt, or killing fiends to recover items, so on and so forth. This may give the impression that side quests are repetitive, but there are many more archetypes than what I've listed, and they are sprinkled in throughout, meaning you won't encounter them in quick succession. This allows them to stay fresh despite the obvious patterns. But what really allows side quests to shine is how party members are often made a focal point of the story being told within them. Let's be honest, the characterization in Final Fantasy VII is a lot better than 16. The characters here are just so much more compelling in terms of their backstories as well as their personalities. Giving them more time to shine in the side quest was a great idea, as it elevates both character and content. For example, early in the game, Barrett gets the nod in a quest focused on parenting. A mother and son in Junon have had a falling out, and as you follow a delivery dog sending supplies between them, Barrett reflects on the relationship between himself and his own daughter. It's a touching sentiment, made only more powerful later on when you learn more about Barrett's backstory. Or later in Gungaga, where Aerith helps you gather ingredients to make mushroom soup. This forever innocent character shows a small glimpse of deviousness when she tricks a farmer into helping them by telling him how the plants are actually praising him. These moments give a small glimpse into the characters, and pairing that up with relatively good activities makes for some pretty good side quests. They aren't the best I've ever played, but they are pretty good overall. I wish a few of them didn't make you grind at the end though. Like, this Billy character shows up throughout the story and in the side content, and has a tale of his own. He gets like 3 or 4 side quests all to himself, but the final one can only be completed after grinding out a bunch of mini-game chocobo races. It was a shame to see the finale of this story locked behind a grind fest, and this was also true of Kyrie's tale as well. Kyrie, I think that's how you say her name? Unfortunately, I never finished them up because I didn't want to grind. That aside though, most of the side quests are worth doing, a vast improvement over Final Fantasy XVI's. Chadley returns from Final Fantasy VII Remake and is responsible for a majority of the game's optional content, both in gathering data about the world, as well as providing a series of combat simulator challenges. Starting with that data called World Intel in-game, and this is the stuff that's really going to feel like repetitive filler. There's 7 regions in the game. One is a giant ocean, but the other 6 are littered with Ubisoft-style map marker objectives to complete. Seriously, there's probably 20 to 30 of these markers in each region, making for like 120 to 180 total. It's a lot. This large number can be divided into 9 different types of content: towers, divine sanctuaries, chocobo locations, combat assignments, life springs, excavations, secret bosses, Moogle houses, and proto-relics. There's only one Moogle house, one secret boss, and one chocobo location per region, meaning all the remaining 20 to 30 markers will be repeats. There might be like 4 fiend fights, 4 proto-relic missions, 5 life springs, 2 excavations, and 4 or 5 towers defined. So not only is the content repeated within a single region, but also across every region. So by the time you find your 30th life spring or 20th divine sanctuary, you're going to be very fatigued of it. So let's take a look at each of these mission types quickly on a case-by-case basis. First up are the Remnawave Towers. These are your standard video game towers where you activate them to reveal other map markers. Not revolutionary or groundbreaking, but I did appreciate that many of them require a bit more thought to scale as you move through the game. Not quite as intricate as the tall necks in Horizon, but still pretty good. Next are the Divine Sanctuaries. These are QTE minigames where you must memorize a button input and repeat it back in sync. By doing so, you're able to buff up your summons or make them easier to defeat in the combat simulator. These are pretty well hidden, but can be found upon breaking crystals out in the world. Again, relatively harmless, but very samey after doing it 18 times. Chocobo locations are limited, but each provides a puzzle of sort. Every region you travel to has a new form of chocobo with a unique ability. Chocobos raised in Nebel can shoot jet spray that grants them higher elevations, while ones raised in Gongaga can jump on giant mushrooms to bounce large distances. You aren't always just given one when reaching a new region though, sometimes you have to earn it. To do so, you'll have to complete slow as molasses stealth puzzles that thankfully include checkpoints. Cloud is forced to move so slowly in these sections, but the chocobo variants are required for full completion, so you'll have to do them in a completionist effort. I really didn't enjoy these. Combat assignments aren't so bad though. You'll be presented variants of normal enemies and asked to defeat them while completing other tasks like beating a timer, staggering an enemy, or preventing it from using a certain move. You don't have to complete all the tasks for it to be counted as finished, but again, if you want full completion, you'll have to do it. To be honest, I hardly noticed the difference amongst the variants compared to their original counterparts, and most of them died rather quickly, which took the thrill out of it. Life springs are perhaps the most basic form of side content. Follow a hawk to a life spring, and press triangle 3 times to unlock some lore intel about the region. The best thing about them is that they are over quickly. Once you find all the life springs in a region, you unlock a special boss fight, and these were pretty sick. These battles challenged far more than combat assignments, and actually saw me wiping a few times, especially in the Gongaga and Nebel regions. It's unfortunate there's only a few. Excavations see you riding on a chocobo around some abandoned ruins and sniffing up buried treasure. Find 3 pieces, and you're done. Relatively simple, but the slow pacing of sniffing and scouring made them a snore. I should note, there is a series of treasure hunts in the ocean region, but I didn't even begin to start those. I imagine they're similar, but I can't say for sure. Moogle houses were like a roller coaster for me. I liked them, then I hated them, and then I liked them again. Here, Cloud is sucked into the Moogle world and is tasked with chasing 5 Moogles into a pen. It gets repetitive quickly, but I ended up viewing them favorably by the end because of the different aesthetic they provided. Again, the game isn't afraid to lean into goofiness, as is evidenced here. I like these moments. And finally, the proto-relics. These are classified as world intel markers, but they're more akin to side quests of their own. Each region has a proto-relic, but the way you obtain it varies each time, which is awesome. For example, in Junon, collecting the proto-relic means getting sucked into a board game called Fort Condor. Here, you must play a Clash Royale-like mode where you deploy units and have to destroy your opponent's base before they destroy yours. Or in Cosmo Canyon, where you play Gears and Gambits, deploying robot units to defeat a boss before time runs out. Or in Gongaga, where you complete combat simulations as if you were training to become a Shinra Turk. There's a lot of variety here, which kept proto-relic missions feeling distinct compared to the rest of the world intel objectives. There's also a story that goes alongside the proto-relics about an ancient samurai, but unfortunately I never got to see how it ended. I figured after gathering all the proto-relics we would just fight him, but no. After doing all of that, you then have to beat all the summons in the combat simulator, then fight them all again in duos before finally getting a chance to face the Samurai Master. This was near the very end of the game, and I was much more interested to see how the story wrapped up, so I prioritized that. I felt like I sort of wasted some time gathering all the proto-relics, but whatever. It's crazy how much content is thrown at you right as the game is about to end. Kinda strange, but I'm pretty sure that was the case in Final Fantasy XVI too. Again, this is optional content that you don't have to do. If you enjoy it, you'll be glad there's so much of it. Same goes for if you're able to avoid the sunk cost fallacy, meaning you enjoy a bit of it at first, but you don't have any problem not completing it all. Unfortunately for me, I didn't fall into those camps. I wanted to complete it all before moving on with the story sections, and this ballooned my playtime by probably 20 hours? No exaggeration. And having finished nearly all of them, do I feel like it was worth that time? No, not really. It's ultimately checklist gameplay additions that are meant for the die-hard fans. When viewed in that light, it's a good addition, but don't be surprised if you grow tired of this world intel activities quickly. After that, we of course have Chadley's combat simulation trials. To be honest, I didn't bother with these at all outside of the summon battles. Fighting against simulations of Ifrit, Phoenix, Bahamut, and more allow the player to unlock summons that can be called for in combat. These were super useful, and it made battling them in the simulator satisfying alongside of the great challenge derived from facing a boss. I never managed to beat Odin though. He requires a defensive playstyle that nothing else in the game, save for the final boss maybe, asks of you. It was a bit of a strange inclusion, and gatekeeping the end of the proto-relic content behind it seemed like another weird choice. Outside of that, you can fight other enemies in the simulator and use world intel to purchase and develop materia from Chadley. And if I'm honest, I like the kid much more in this game than in Remake. He's kinda grown on me. Much of the remaining content falls into what largely can be considered mini-games. From chocobo races, to hard modes of Fort Condor and Gears and Gambits, to a spaceship simulator, to piano playing, to doing crunches, to jump frog, to chocobo gliding, to racing on the G-bike, and of course Queen's Blood, there are a lot. So many mini-games. Between these and the mandatory ones mentioned earlier, the number of minigames is staggering, each with many challenges to engage with if you want to maximize your scores. What surprises me most is how fleshed out many of the minigames are, as very few are half-baked. There's no doubt a level of quality to them, whether you like them or not, but ultimately that's what folks are going to focus on, if it enhanced or dragged down the overall feel of the game. I couldn't blame anyone who disliked this game and cited the sheer number of minigames as a reason. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that your appreciation or disdain for these will be the #1 factor in determining if you view this game positively or negatively, even more so than potential story changes. That's how many of them there are. They come along, you play them once, and then never see them again unless you choose to engage with it more. I didn't find any of them to be intrusive or terrible, but I also never found myself wanting to jump back in and play more of them outside of what was required for story or world intel completion. Well, except for Queen's Blood, that is, arguably the best card game we've gotten since Gwent in Witcher 3 Wild Hunt 9 years ago. In Queen's Blood, you play cards into 3 different lanes, with your total power within a lane representing the number of coins it yields. If you have 10 power in a lane, you have 10 coins to earn from it. You win the game by having the most number of coins, but the kicker is that you only collect the coins from lanes that you're already winning. So even if you have a higher score in 2 out of the 3 lanes, you could still lose if your opponent has more coins in the remaining lane. The cards you play each have a cost, a power level, and a grid on them that show which tiles they affect. The playing board is 3x5. At the start, the left column has 1 green peg in each square, while the right column has 1 red peg in each square. The pegs represent the cost of a card that can be played there. With only 1 peg, you can only play a 1-cost card there. However, each card affects certain tiles around it, and by stacking them you can put 2 or 3 pegs in a square that allows you to play more powerful cards. You can also take over squares by changing the color of pegs from red to green, or from green to red if your opponent makes the move. One of the most powerful things you can do is take an opponent's 2-peg square, making it a 3-peg green square that only you can use. And then of course, each card has various effects that can increase or decrease power levels, as well as outright destroy other cards. Building decks that synergize together is key to victory. That's all I'll say on the basic mechanics of the game, but there's 2 reasons that Queen's Blood is excellent. First of all, it's very strategic with a lot of options for deck building and player expression, making it a very worthwhile game to get invested in, even if most in-game opponents are relatively easy to beat. There's a depth to the game that you don't often see in card games found within video games. But equally as important is that Queen's Blood also tells a story in-game. There's a whole plot focused on the game's creation and the evil that inspired it. It really reminded me of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which was cool. So not only do you get a well-realized card battler, but you also get an interesting story to accompany it. There's 30 different opponents to play in-game, with tons of cards to collect and build decks out of, making it an absolute joy to experience. Okay, yes, that's pretty much everything you can do in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. There's other arena fights and a few other goodies, but yeah, it's honestly a monumental amount of content, but that doesn't mean it's all worth doing, so keep that in mind. If you wanted to do everything, and I do mean everything, you could easily spend over 100 hours with the game. So if that sounds right up your alley, perhaps this is a good investment for you. Alright, let's get into the real meat of the gameplay with a look at combat. If you played 7 Remake, you'll immediately feel at home as much of the combat system remains unchanged. However, if you're coming over from 16, there's going to be a lot of differences. Rebirth uses the same ATB combat system as 7 Remake. In an effort to pay homage to turn-based Final Fantasies of yesteryear, while still updating combat for a modern audience, the team has used the ATB system. Essentially, you're free to move around the arena, do basic attacks, dodge, guard, switch between party members, and use your triangle special moves like Cloud's Punisher mode that does extra damage, or Red 13's Vengeance mode that allows him to siphon back health. All of these actions can be done for free, but some modes may have to be charged first. Anyway, you'll want to take advantage of all of them. Basic attacks to fill your ATB meter, blocks to mitigate damage, or dodges to avoid all damage, and perhaps even pressure a foe. But basic attacks are the most important thing, as most of your potential comes from the ATB charges you get from doing those basic attacks. Each character has a meter with 2 charges. Every action usually requires at least 1 charge, but sometimes 2. This includes casting spells, summoning your summons, using character abilities, and using items like potions or ethers. This is where the system shines, getting into that flow of building up your ATB meter by dodging and attacking in a great rhythm, and then using elemental attacks or abilities to build your enemy's stagger meter. Identifying opponent weaknesses and then acting accordingly using your limited ATB charges is the key to success. Some enemies will die outright to basic attacks, but many foes have much more health than you, requiring you to pressure and stagger them. Pressuring a foe increases the rate at which the stagger meter fills, and staggering an enemy temporarily neutralizes them, allowing for massive damage to be dealt in their weakened state. As a result, almost every encounter plays out this way. Do some basic damage to build the ATB charges amongst your 3 party members, assess an enemy's weakness, attack that weakness to pressure them, and then do massive damage upon staggering them. When taking on tougher enemies and bosses, you won't be focused solely on dealing damage, as you also want to mitigate incoming damage by healing. You can of course do this through potions, but also through spells. Every character fits into a familiar archetype like mage, melee beater, tank, and more, but you are free to customize them a little bit, as we will come to see. But for now, suffice it to say that there's variety. Barret is a great tank, Aerith is a great support mage, and Cloud and Tifa are fantastic for DPS. Your goal is to constantly switch between the party members, building up ATB charges and expending them on valuable maneuvers, whether it be attacks or healing. Of course, when things get tough, you have a few extra tricks up your sleeve. Upon defeating divine beings in Chadley's combat simulator, you can unlock them as summons to use in combat. These may provide extra healing with Phoenix, or elemental damage with Shiva or Ifrit, or perhaps just raw power in the case of Bahamut Arisen. Of course, the summon meter activates only after staggering an enemy once, so you can't just spam them in every fight. They make for a powerful ally who can turn the tide of battle. Also returning from 7 Remake and other Final Fantasy games are limit breaks. Upon taking enough damage, characters in this game can do extra powerful attacks that output a ton of damage. These are great to use when an enemy is staggered, dealing out incredible heaps of damage, even to the toughest bosses. I never played Final Fantasy VII Remake's Intermission DLC. I think it was DLC, I don't think it was standalone, I could be misremembering that, but anyway, it introduced synergy abilities and they return here. They've been greatly expanded owed to the sheer number of combinations within the party. With these, 2 party members will come together to do an ultimate attack. Again, it reminded me of Persona, the Showtime attacks in Persona 5 Royal. But yeah, they come together and essentially they do a heavy damage move, but there's also a few other things like splitting the ATB bar into 3 smaller portions, allowing you to do more actions with the same amount of energy. These were fun to pull off and watch, and it's cool to see some of the characters attack in unison. Outside of the flashiness though, they don't change up combat all that much. And really, that is perhaps the biggest flaw within the combat system. Its unwillingness to evolve or change. The strategies I was using at the very beginning of the game ended up being about the same even in the final hours. I'd rush in with Cloud, use an assess materia to find an enemy weakness, switch to Barret and use overcharge, and then use his magic materias to attack an elemental weakness, stagger the enemy, and then use Tifa or Cait Sith to do heavy damage. Occasionally, the story will force you to use other characters, but often this strategy was enough to win every fight for me. Kind of like super effective moves in Pokemon, this was the dominant strategy, and I hardly ever felt compelled to switch up the playstyle. In fact, the only time I did was when story missions made me, or I faced an enemy with a unique feature like Rufus, who counters every physical attack, or Odin, who can do a one-hit KO move on the entire party if you take too much damage. Very rarely do you have to switch it up, and it can lead to a bit of fatigue. Generally, the amazing animations, the crunchy sound effects, the great music, and more is enough to keep it feeling fun, but it surely didn't evolve much in the 66 hours I played. Perhaps a few more unique enemies could have switched it up, something other than frustrating one-hit KO moves or enemies that just neutralize all damage and counter physical hits unless you catch them at the right time. Yeah, the fights with Rufus and Odin, not fun. At least not to me. I'm sure some people enjoyed it, but not me. Anyway, they needed something else to just change things up. That brings us to overall difficulty, and I must say, I think it's pretty well tuned. Despite having a similar experience in many fights, I was still challenged in many encounters, especially with bosses. In a world where normal modes feel more and more like easy mode, it's nice to see the standard setting having some backbone here. If you try to spam your way to victory against a tough boss, you will die. You must take time to heal. And if you waltz into a regular fiend fight unprepared, you may find yourself dying out of nowhere. It didn't happen to me a ton, but I certainly had perished a few times against foes that I had already beaten. There are a handful of difficulty spikes, particularly against Vincent and the final boss, who is... okay, yeah, it's Sephiroth. Is that really a surprise to anyone though? But for the most part, combat had a good balance when it comes to challenge. So overall thoughts on combat would be that it's good. It's a lot of fun. It does require you to balance offensive maneuvers with healing. The animation work is crazy good. Summons and limits add new layers. The difficulty is on point, at least on normal mode, but you can never escape the feeling that every combat encounter is sort of playing out the same way. So take that how you will. I never found myself saying, oh god, not another fight, but I also rarely thought to myself, wow, I really need to try something new to beat this encounter. Not to sound like a broken record, but much of the RPG elements found in Remake carry over to Rebirth, with one major exception. Just like in the previous game, you're free to customize the party how you see fit. Of course, 2 new characters are added here. Yuffie returns from intermission, and Cait Sith joins the party in the back half of the game. They add some new dimensions to gameplay, and make assigning members to each of your 3 party slots a true treat. For most of the game, I ran Cloud, Barret, and either Tifa or Cait Sith, but I did take some time to experiment with Aerith, Red 13, and Yuffie as well. Outside of story missions, the player is free to set the party how they see fit, and with so much optional content, the door is wide open to experiment and see who you like and who you don't. Each of the 7 playable characters fit into predefined roles as previously mentioned. Barret and Red 13 are tanks, Tifa, Cloud, and Yuffie are DPS, and Aerith and Cait Sith are more support-oriented. However, these lines can be easily blurred. Both Red 13, Cait Sith, and Aerith are capable of outputting a lot of damage, and even Cloud can be beefy like a tank if you build him up that way. The game has a set idea for the roles characters will play, but you're able to customize them how you see fit. First and foremost, this is done with gear selection. Each character has a weapon, a piece of armor, and an accessory for additional benefits. You can buy or find these items out in the overworld, with the purple chest in particular offering up a lot of new weapons. Unlike in Final Fantasy XVI, not every weapon you find is going to be an immediate upgrade, as instead, it may offer up more magic damage at the cost of physical damage, or vice versa. The same goes for armor pieces that may boost physical resistances at the cost of magical resistances. Each weapon also has a unique ability that can be mastered in combat and then placed on any other weapon you find, which allows you to keep your favorite abilities while also swapping to harder hitting armaments. As you play, your weapons level up alongside of you, meaning it's rare to find something that is immediately an upgrade. Therefore, the focus is on mastering the weapon abilities so that you can carry them over to any new gear you may find useful. Then of course, there's the materia slots. Each weapon has a set number of slots for materia to be equipped, with the endgame weapons having a ton. By finding or purchasing materia, you can slot them in for additional effects like elemental damages, buffs and debuffs, heals, and status ailments in combat. There's a large quantity of them to be played with, but for anyone playing on the normal difficulty, most of the elemental materials like fire or blizzard will be more than enough to carry you through. On harder modes, you're going to need to fine-tune things, but on a more casual run, you can equip your favorites and roll with it for the most part. Again, materia levels up as you do, and eventually unlock more powerful moves like harder hitting versions of Thunder and Arrow. These are what provide a bit of flexibility to the relatively rigid character builds. For me personally, I love using Barret not only as a tank, but also as a magic user, being my prime source of elemental attacks. His ranged nature made him stray away from enemies, meaning elemental spells were rarely cancelled because of being stunned. The flexibility afforded to me in assigning materia is what allowed me to mess around a bit, and I really appreciated that. So much of this was already true in the first part of the remake, but the skill trees in Rebirth have been dramatically improved. Called folios here, skill trees are a lot less linear and more focused on player choice than ever before. Sure, they still contain the same stat upgrades like bonus damage, more elemental resistances, or extra health, but they also contain new things, like making thunder-based attacks free for Barret or offering up new synergy abilities to use in combat. These allow you to flesh out the characters how you want a lot more than you could in the previous installment, and you don't need me to tell you that more player choice is often a good thing in an RPG. As a whole, there's a bit more variety found here in Rebirth versus Remake. This is owed, of course, to the new party members in Yuffie and Cait Sith, but also because of the customization found in the folios. To be fair, this is not Baldur's Gate 3 level of build crafting, but it's certainly a step up from what we got before, and that's about all you can ask for any sequel. Alright, if you're worried about spoilers, then this is a good spot to jump ahead or to stop watching, because I'm going to get into the juicy bits. Not just yet, but we will get there shortly. I'll start by saying I do think the story component of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth may disappoint some people, especially if you've never played the original. Part 1 of this remake series was action-packed and heavily plot-driven as you were introduced to this world and experienced a bunch of heart-pounding moments, like blowing up the first reactor or seeing the Section 7 plate fall. And you don't get quite as much of that here in Rebirth, as instead, much more emphasis has been placed on character drama rather than a thrilling plot. Rebirth is much more interested in delving deeper into its characters, examining their backstories, their personalities, and the dynamics between them, and I think that's the #1 most important thing to understand about the game's story. That's not to say big moments don't come, but when you view this game's narrative through character exploration rather than plot, you'll come to appreciate it a lot more. If you don't, you may find it a little on the boring side. That's because much of the adventure sees the party pursuing the black-robed men who they believe will lead them to Sephiroth. At the end of the previous game, Cloud and company defied destiny, beating up the Arbiters of Fate, opening up new possibilities for this game. That promise of something new may have got the juices flowing for many fans, and having that excitement met with a simple game of follow the leader might be a bit of a letdown. I felt that way originally as I moved through the Grasslands and Junon, the first 2 regions of the game. However, upon reaching Corel, more specifically Costa del Sol, my perspective began to change. I started to appreciate the group dynamics a lot more. Truly, this party is a ragtag group. You have the former ex-soldier Cloud, the bartender Baddie Tifa, the last remaining Cetra Aerith, the tough but big softy Barret, the failed lab experiment Red 13, Wu-Tai assassin Yuffie, and eventually the cat fortune teller and Shinra company man, Cait Sith. All of these folks come from dramatically different backgrounds, save for Tifa and Cloud, but they mesh together so well. The dynamics between them are incredible, as some characters outright love each other to death, like Tifa and Aerith, while others aren't so trusting, like Barret and Cait Sith. This game is about the party gelling together, no doubt brought closer after the events of Midgar. When viewed through this lens, you come to appreciate the storytelling a lot more, whether it's the quiet moments of vacation on the cruise or the beach, or the heavy-hitting moments like learning about Barret's backstory. I mean, they aren't afraid to make you laugh at times, like how Cloud tricks this Shinra infantry unit into turning their backs on everyone, following him as their leader, or how party members are often forced to do cactuar poses. They lean into the humor, and I love those moments. Truly though, the game strikes a rich balance between light-hearted adventure and moments of tragedy and betrayal, and it elevates the gameplay. For example, spending time playing carnival minigames may seem trivial, but when you see how it brings the party together, providing them moments of genuine joy and laughter, you can't help but to smile along. And then, just a few hours later, you're under the golden saucer, learning about why Barrett's hometown now resents him and how he carries that burden. I won't get into specifics, but it does a fantastic job of expanding on this already likable character. And without spoiling it, Red 13 also gets an amazing reveal in the later chapters that I didn't see coming. Again, keep in mind, this is my first time experiencing this story in full, but the point is that they do a great job of balancing the humor and the lightheartedness with the moments of tragedy and pain. But yeah, I really enjoyed my time with all of these characters, especially Cait Sith. That might be controversial to say, but I loved him. He's honestly one of my favorite characters in a video game ever. Between the look, the mannerisms, the Scottish accent, and his rise, fall, and eventual rise, I loved him. Didn't like his box throwing section? It sucked, but Cait himself loved him. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how distinct and how wonderful the other characters are, like the muscle-headed Dio, the stoic Rude being paired up with the brat Elena, and a pilot named Sid Highwind. The supporting cast is equally as awesome as the main cast. It's just great. So yeah, you get a combination of light and heavy moments that ultimately let the party members shine for themselves. My advice is to embrace that and just enjoy the journey and the characters. Don't worry so much about how you're mostly just following around black-robed men. Now, that's not to say there is no plot. There certainly is. The Shinra Corporation and its Turk mercenaries still play a prominent role in the story as they continue to seek out the Promised Land. Between them, the party, and Sephiroth, you get this unholy triangle of conflict that does drive the plot that is here forward. It mostly comes to a head in the game's final 2 chapters after brewing subtly across the entire adventure. Okay, from here on out, I'm going to talk spoilers and specifics, so if you haven't finished the game yet, perhaps skip ahead or click away. I want to start by giving a shout out to the game's opening 2 hours, in which the player experiences the events of 5 years ago that began Sephiroth's downward spiral. Oh, and as a side note, you get to play as Sephiroth for a little bit at the beginning, which, totally awesome, of course, that's amazing. But yeah, the first game leaves the man sort of shrouded in mystery, but we finally learn more about him here. We come to see that he was a soldier too, working with Cloud, but whom eventually went insane after learning that he is one of the byproducts of Shinra's mad scientist, Hojo. Sephiroth is revealed to be the son of Genova, an alien entity that came to the planet years ago. The silver-haired soldier begins to believe himself a god, a descendant of one at the very least, and that it's his birthright to reclaim the planet for Genova, which of course means destroying all life on it. He burns down Cloud and Tifa's hometown in the process, and escapes, only to have come back 5 years later in Midgar, where Cloud and the party overcome him and defy destiny. The ending of that first game is quite pivotal to the events of Rebirth. It was a signal to the players that this remake wouldn't be afraid to take the story in new directions, and we certainly see that here. There's a big emphasis on multiple timelines in Rebirth, with Cloud and Tifa recalling the events from 5 years ago, but not quite having the same recollection. For example, Tifa doesn't remember Cloud being there at all, and it's explained by the game's ending. At the same time, the Whispers of Fate from the previous game have now split their allegiance, with some serving Sephiroth and others supporting the planet after the original timeline shatters. And I should note that environmentalism continues to be a large theme of the game, as Sephiroth and Shinra's destructive forces are at odds with the planet's lifestream, essentially Mother Nature itself. That's a side note though, but again, the multiple timelines theme. At the end of Remake, a character named Zack is revealed to still be alive. Zack was a soldier as well, working with Cloud and Sephiroth, but whom died in the original canon. There's sections here where you play briefly as this character as he attempts to nurse Cloud and Aerith back to good health in his own version of the timeline. For most of the story, it's unclear what his purpose is, but by the story's end, you come to see why it was so vital to the events of the main timeline that we are playing through. And that brings us to the iconic moment I mentioned much earlier. Final spoiler warning, the death of Aerith. In the original game, Sephiroth descends down and kills Aerith in cold blood as she prays to the Lifestream for healing. It's a shocking moment as such a beloved and innocent character is killed off completely, never to return. It provides the player with a vengeance that fuels their journey to find and kill Sephiroth for the remainder of the game. It's a powerful and iconic moment that draws a ton of emotion out of the player, more so than any other moment. That's the case in the original 1997 game, but things have been changed here, and I do find it slightly worse. Now, again, I didn't play the original, but what we got here seems a little less impactful. Perhaps that's due to playing a remake in which you already know the moment is coming, but still. Here in Rebirth, while in Zack's timeline, Cloud is gifted the white materia from Aerith so that he can bring it back to his own timeline to give it to his Aerith. She channels its power while praying, but Sephiroth still descends to kill her. This time though, Cloud reaches Aerith in time to deflect Sephiroth's blade, but because of the converging timelines, Aerith still perishes as if she had been struck. That's because in Zack's timeline, Sephiroth catches up to her just as Cloud is sent back to his own timeline. Yeah, it's a bit convoluted. Either way, Aerith still dies, but her death means less here for two reasons. First of all, Cloud and the player don't get the same level of motivation. In the original, Cloud's failure to react in time is what leads to Aerith's death. He takes on that guilt that fuels his feelings for revenge. Here though, Cloud does reach Aerith in time, but still fails, although it seems less like his fault. Maybe this will go somewhere in the third game, but I do feel it robs this iconic moment of some of the oomph. At the same time, in the final moments, Cloud is shown to still see Aerith like an apparition of sorts. This suggests to me that she will still play a role in the next game, making her death less impactful. You won't truly feel her absence if she's still just kinda along for the ride. So yeah. It's a controversial change, but it's been apparent since Remake that the team was going to switch things up. Much of the reaction to this will be on an individual level, some will be okay with it and others won't. Regardless, this decision puts a lot of weight on the third game to deliver and justify this change with something special. As for Rebirth, it did leave me feeling a little disappointed with how this moment was handled, but I'm hopeful that it makes the next game all the better. Time will tell on that front. As always, let's bring it home with a look at the presentation and performance. Up front, this game was built solely for the PlayStation 5, meaning it gets to take advantage of its power. There's a graphics mode and a performance mode. I started the game on graphics mode, but played mostly on performance to get that sweet 60 FPS versus 30 on graphics mode. Stop laughing at me, PC gamers. I did notice a bit of pop-in and some relatively ugly textures, but honestly, the performance was rock solid besides that. I can put up with some weaker texture work if it means no crashes, no load screens, and a relatively consistent 60 FPS, which is what I got while playing. I did get a few frame drops during some combat sections where shit was really getting crazy with the particles, but it was negligible at best. If you're a real diehard about this sort of stuff, check out Digital Foundry's performance review, but if you're like me, you just want a good looking game that runs well, and that's the case here, nothing to really sweat about. In particular, I do want to give a shout out to how seamless the open world is, as there's really no loading screens in the traditional sense. Loading is masked behind things like elevator rides, but I prefer that much more than looking at a blank screen. Of course, when you fast travel, you will see such a screen, but only for a few seconds. Literally, I timed it between 2 to 3 seconds depending on how far you had to go, and that's pretty impressive. It feels like they really maximized the PlayStation 5's power, and it's felt most on this front. In terms of graphics, yep, the game looks good. Again, I'm not the most detailed person on these things, but that's because they don't mean a whole lot to me personally. In particular though, the game consistently is dropping incredible views that make you feel so small like I mentioned earlier. Many games are content with giving you like 2 or 3 of these moments, but Rebirth does it like 8 or more times, which is awesome. It makes the world feel planet-sized instead of just video game-sized. Oh, and the lighting work is fantastic as well, especially when coming out of dark caves. You're constantly shown that moment of brightness where your eyes have to adjust to the harshness of sunlight. It's awesome. Probably the best example of a video game nailing that feeling. In terms of music, you're gonna find a lot of excellent work as you'd expect. I think it's going to go underappreciated by many folks since it's meant to fade into the background much of the time, but it's awesome. I really like the looping themes that play in each region, especially that in the grasslands that makes use of my favorite instrument, the piano, while accompanying it with other wind instruments to really promote that feeling of flowing grass. Then in combat they bring the heavier brass instruments to drum up excitement. It's all good. One thing to note here though is that there is quite a few moments of sounds being washed out by others. For example, in those World Intel combat assignments, you'll have moments where the music is playing, an NPC is talking, and the combat sound effects are happening, and it just leads to a lot of messy audio. It's like a hodgepodge of sounds fighting for your attention, which didn't sound great. Aside from this though, relatively good sound work after playing around in the settings for a little bit. A special shout out needs to be given to the voice work, which was consistently excellent amongst all major characters. A lot of personality is portrayed through the voice work alone. Like, if you didn't know what the characters look like, and you closed your eyes while listening to their voices, I'm sure you could picture a general idea of what they look like, especially Aerith and Barrett. Yeah, it's that good. I already mentioned how much I loved Kate Sith's Scottish accent. It really endeared me to the character, but perhaps the biggest round of applause needs to go to Max Middleman, who voices Red 13 with 2 very distinct voices. Max does both and nails it, really elevating the twist found with that character to a whole new level. So yeah, just fantastic work overall. So yeah, presentation wise, no huge complaints and no issues to report. A few minor ones like some weak textures, a bit of pop-in, and some jumbled sound work, but I think the other components more than make up for it. I remember back in 2020 wondering if I would even like playing Final Fantasy VII Remake. It was a game that didn't appeal too much to me before release, but the damn thing had been hyped up for so long, I felt like I had to play it. It was such an event. Well, I'm glad I did, because now, 4 years later, I've experienced 2 great games with the promise of a third one on the horizon. Despite the connection though, Rebirth is a drastically different game than Remake. The first game was quite linear and plot driven, but the opposite is true here. An open world RPG with many more avenues of content and a greater focus on developing characters. That's not to say one is better than the other, it's just different, and it allows Rebirth to feel like a fresh experience compared to Remake. Rebirth succeeds by providing the player with an adventure, one that emphasizes character dynamics, backstories, and growth while leaning into good-natured fun and stressful moments equally. It diverts away from the canon of the original story while still paying homage to what's come before, making for a respectable experience. It also gives the player a ton of things to do, both in the story and within the staggering amount of optional content. While not all of it will be enjoyed by every single player, there's enough variety that most will be satisfied, at least I hope so. Because when you begin to view the minigames as a way of building up the party dynamics, you gain a new appreciation for them within that context. And when viewed like this, you will really get the feel that your party went on a massive expedition, one that was full of moments good and bad, happy and sad, and more, which was amazing. And now the third game is free to rein things back in for the plot now that we have a better feel for who the characters really are. And I'm happy to feel that our cynical beliefs that breaking up the 1997 game into 3 parts here in the 2020s was actually just a cash grab, yeah, it's nice to say that those feelings have long since been quelled. Both Remake and Rebirth have felt like full-size games, especially this most recent release. It doesn't feel like they cut any corners, as everything offered here is vastly fleshed out. From excellent performance, to great voice acting, to fun combat, to impeccable world building, and more, you can feel the passion that the team has for this project and making it as great as it can be. So for those reasons, I highly recommend checking out Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, so long as you've played Remake already. I'm really stoked for the third entry to see how this story wraps up, but in the meantime, Rebirth is a damn good game. So much so that I'd happily pay 2,000 gil for it. Thanks for watching. Alright y'all, I hope you liked this look at Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This video is out much later than I expected because, honestly, I didn't think the game would take me almost 70 hours, but yeah. Between the long playtime and a vacation and a sickness, it kind of got pushed back a few weeks. You know, I'm still kind of recovering even as I record this, but I'm mostly better now. But yeah, mostly I appreciate your patience waiting for this video. I know it was a long time coming, but hopefully it was worth the wait. As for upcoming videos, I'm still plugging along on Persona 3 Reload, but I'm not sure what I'll cover next. Dragon's Dogma 2 and Rise of Ronin were on my mind, but their time seems to have come and gone. Besides, they didn't look all that appealing to me personally, so I imagine the next look will be at either Stellar Blade or Helldivers 2, depending on what I'm feeling, so stay tuned for that. At the same time, I've also had this incredible itch to play through the Spyro trilogy again and make some videos on those games, but I'm not sure if you'd like that or not. I'm thinking something similar to my Sly series, where I do long format videos on each of the games, but it's hard to know if there's enough to say about each of the Spyro games because of the simple nature, so I'm not really sure. Not to mention, I'd have to use footage from the Reignited trilogy since I don't have any way to record original PS1 footage. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with that. I'm thinking about it. I just really want to play Spyro because I love it, and I haven't played it in, I don't know, maybe a decade now, so we'll see what happens. Let me know if there's anything that you guys would really like me to cover in the comments below, and also make sure to share your thoughts on Rebirth as well. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopeNapNarp, join our Discord, the link is below, and as always guys, have a nice day, and take care.